Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I'd like to talk again about Scientology. All right, and I'm going to be honest. Okay, I saw a video yesterday with Aaron Smith-Levin. He has a YouTube channel, Growing Up in Scientology, and he was interviewing a former Sea Org member. Okay, a person who left the Sea Org as a young person in their 20s, and actually got into the Army and was successful and became actually a helicopter pilot in the Army. So a real success story. But I was really upset by the interview because this person who left Scientology, his mother stayed in Scientology in the Sea Org, and she became an elderly person in the Sea Org. And basically, this person, his name is Mike Brown. Okay, it was an interview. You can check it out on Aaron Smith Levin's channel. All right. This person described basically how his mother has really been abused. I mean, terribly abused by Scientology, and basically revealing basically just sort of unwritten policies, sort of unspoken policies in Scientology that have to do with how you deal with elderly people in the Sea Org, in the Sea organization. Okay. And I was really, really upset by that interview. And actually, I'm really surprised that either in Florida at the middle district of Florida, I guess it would be the middle district, and then California, because they're in Los Angeles, I would say it would be the eastern district of California, or the southern district. I don't know if it's the eastern or southern, but I am really surprised, okay, that the U.S. attorneys, all right, I'm talking about the U.S. attorneys for these districts, these federal districts in Florida and in California. I'm surprised that the FBI and the U.S. attorneys haven't gone after Scientology for elder abuse, for basically elder abuse, and for credit card access device fraud. Okay, when I say access device fraud, what access device fraud? Okay, let me just make it clear. I work in criminal defense and I work in federal criminal defense. All right, and basically, access device is kind of like when you use somebody's social security number, account number, personal information, basically as an access to like credit devices. Basically, I mean, it's probably more broad than that, but it's kind of a funny, funky definition where basically you use somebody's information as access. Okay, and basically, getting credit cards for old people without them directly authorizing it, or I don't know, the authorizing. Who knows what kind of contracts they sign? But let's just say remotely getting credit cards in people's name, using their personal information. All right, that to me is very, very close to a felony offense. And it may be a felony because using somebody's identity and personal data to get credit, to basically use for their purposes. In other words, Scientology is basically asking for and getting credit cards in people's names so that they can charge all their expensive auditing. Okay, they're overpriced auditing basically, and basically draining the bank accounts of old people. So, and that's not even the end of it. I mean, the elder abuse goes so far, and of course now I have to ask myself, well, how much of that is a federal crime? Okay, I know the access device fraud, the credit card fraud, that's a federal crime. Okay, if it is actually a crime, if they are actually committing a crime. In other words, you'd have to first examine all the contracts that the Sea Org has. They may have like little clauses in their contract, like in the fine print, where you're like authorizing the management to actually, manage your financial affairs or something like that. Or maybe as you get older, maybe they have documents that you sign where you actually grant like a power of attorney to the staff basically to manage your finances. Now, I don't know about that, but let's just say if the FBI were to examine and to investigate how Scientology deals with elderly people, okay, especially their finances, all right, and if it were to be determined that Scientology is actually committing access device and credit card fraud, okay, that's very serious, all right. That's a total federal offense, all right. The other thing too is the actual abuse of elderly people, all right. And I encourage anybody to watch this interview. I'm not going to summarize it as well as Mike Brown summarized it. So, I would, and I don't know how anybody's going to come to my channel before they go to Aaron Smith-Levin's channel. But if you haven't seen it, you have to watch that interview just to see how bad the elder abuse is in the Sea Org. Okay, now basically what Mike Brown described was basically his mother, as she was getting older and older, she was becoming more frail and maybe wasn't getting the best nutrition, maybe was living too much stress, and she basically started having heart problems. Okay, and basically as she got closer and closer to having a heart attack, basically it it's interesting how the Sea Organization, they don't really care that much about the health of their members. They basically, the only thing they're concerned about basically is that when someone looks like they're about to get severely disabled or maybe die or whatever and need emergency treatment, they just want to get them off the premises as fast as possible so they don't have people dying on their premises. And that's really, it's incredible how selfish that is, and how disregarding that is of the dignity of other people. But basically, they just want to get them out of the premises as fast as possible. And then when they do come back, if they survive, they don't really treat them that well, because I think the ethos of Scientology is that you're going to live another life, and basically this is just a meat sack, and that when we can just get rid of this body, you just go to another body. And so they don't really have a lot of, because of their religion, they don't really have a lot of like regard for people's illnesses, or how, especially as they're getting older. And because people join the Sea Org, and apparently, there's like a lifetime commitment, basically, as they get older, it's almost more effective for Scientology. And it's probably more efficient for Scientology just to kind of let them die, and just kind of not invest too much liability or concern for elderly people as they're getting more frail. Okay. So basically, this person ended up having a couple of mild heart attacks, and then finally a serious heart attack, had to have bypass surgery. Now, some of that may be due to her genetics. I can't say Scientology caused the heart attack, okay? But it's the way they treat people when they're having, like, say, health problems, okay? Because she comes back from her heart attack, and apparently she wasn't treated very well, okay? She was kind of a little bit abandoned, probably wasn't hydrated enough, wasn't given, good enough nutrition. And then in her recovery from the bypass surgery, basically, she became, I think, dehydrated, malnourished, and started having complications of a pneumonia that was probably somewhat related to the lack of fresh air, good nutrition, whatever, just the living conditions. And so she ended up having pneumonia, but the symptoms she presented looked like she was having a stroke because her oxygen levels were going down. Okay, so she had kind of an unusual pneumonia that didn't maybe have like the bronchitis. It was just kind of she had inflammation in the lungs, or there was like fluid building up in the lungs, and basically her oxygen saturation went down, and she looked like she was having a stroke. So basically Scientology was like, well, let's just get her out of here, so they probably just thought she was going to die, basically, but they didn't want her dying on the premises. So she ends up going to a hospital, and it turns out that she could recover, and so her son, thank God, her son was able to get her out of there, and get her basically get her rescued and put her in a more reasonable setting for an older person. But where the elderly abuse comes in is not just the mistreatment, but it's also, as she was let's say, I think it was after the heart attack and before the complication, basically this elderly person, I think let me see if I understand this. I think Scientology, because basically their Sea Org members are like they're almost like impoverished servants. They live in poverty. Sea Org, I think, helps them get like benefits, like disability benefits or retirement benefits, like Social Security. And so some of these old people can start to build up a bank balance. Okay. And I think Scientology sort of realizes that. Okay. And so what they'll do is they'll monitor, I think, the bank accounts of their Sea Org members. And as they start to develop, like, say, a $10,000, $11,000 balance, whatever, I think Scientology will start to almost sell them these old people who they don't even care about. Basically saying, hey, maybe some auditing will help you with your health problems. And so the auditing, it just so turns out in Scientology, this stupid thing where you hold on to these cans and do like a lie detector thing or whatever. Basically, they overprice it. And so they can, just for a few auditing sessions, they could charge you, like, say, $10,000. And so basically they'll try to sell these old people who already are really living in poverty and really not treated very well, trying to sell them this worthless, basically worthless, stupid auditing stuff. Okay. And they'll charge them like to the point where they'll like evacuate their savings, basically. Okay, and then worse, because they are developing, like say, a fixed income, because they have that Social Security income, they could justify a credit history, or let's say a credit profile, where they could justify, let's say, getting credit cards with high balances or relatively high balances. And so what they'll do is that Scientology will take the personal data, the access device data from their elderly members, and they'll actually get credit cards to justify to pay, for all this auditing. And then if they die, well, who cares about the credit card debt? It just goes with the person dies, and Scientology is not on the hook for that. So basically, it's just exploitation to the point that that's almost unconscionable. Now the question is, I understand the credit card fraud. Okay, that is clearly a federal crime. I don't know. I'm not aware of any federal crime of elder abuse. I think that's probably California state crime. So, maybe you could say Rico, because what you could do with Rico is maybe you could have federal Rico, and the predicate offenses could involve some federal and some state crimes. Okay, so I could see federal Rico. In other words, I could say that it's like a systematic, mistreatment of elderly people as a way of extracting money and reducing liability. In other words, they systematically try to get people who are sick to get out of the premises so they can die on the outside. And when they come back, they're not really treated very well because they don't really care. They're not really going to benefit from an elderly person who's just, caring for an elderly person doesn't benefit the bottom line of Scientology. So basically, it's just a combination of mistreatment and trying to get them off the premises to reduce liability. And then also at the same time, extracting like resources from elderly people. And so I think it's like an elder abuse, basically, combined with credit card access device, financial fraud, basically. But I would say I would say it qualifies for Rico, because Rico is basically when you have an organized scheme to commit various felonies, okay, in the furtherance of the organization, the success of the organization. So basically the organization benefits, I think, from this elder abuse and this access device and credit card fraud. So basically I could see Rico charges. Now the question is, would the U.S. attorney want to go after the organization itself, or would they also want to prosecute, let's say, leaders of the organization? Okay, well, that gets complicated, because first of all, it has the cloak of religious, the cloak of being a religion. And so it's going to be some of these issues, like say how they treat people, has to do with the way they believe, that they have beliefs that like this body doesn't mean that much. And so you're going to start getting into their religious beliefs a little bit. And I think just in the United States, it's probably unprecedented to bring charges against a religion per se, or a religious leader per se. It'd be very difficult. But I think that's a hurdle that we ought to take on, and I think we as Americans, I think we should, take on the challenge of identifying these abusive religions, especially if they're egregious in their abuse. And we need to find ways to get even the religious leaders to be criminally liable, and sort of find ways like in the law to sort of negotiate, some of the typical barriers to prosecuting a religion. Now, part of the problem is that part of that barrier is the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and you can't just legislate around the Constitution. So I don't know. I think there's probably a few Supreme Court cases in the way of actually having a direct shot at something like Scientology, because I think it probably hasn't even been litigated yet. There probably aren't enough test cases out there where they're criminally prosecuting religions per se, or religious leaders. I think very rarely does it happen. Like say a recent example was the Warren Jeffs out of the fundamentalist LDS from Utah, where basically, I think it was either Texas or Utah. They brought, direct criminal charges against Warren Jeffs, I think for, sexual crimes, basically. And I think in the case of David Miscavige, it's not going to be that easy, because David Miscavige, because he's so high up in the chain of command, it's going to be really hard to really prove that he was directly approving of this like systematic policy of systematically abusing elderly people. Now he may know all about it, and he may be perfectly happy with it, and he may even be orchestrating it, but because there's so many levels of management between David Miscavige and the actual, abusive practice, it's going to be really hard to prove that David Miscavige is the orchestrator. You know what I mean? Even though he is, it's going to be hard to prove that. Okay, and then also the problem that you're getting into a religion, and so they're going to come up with all kind of First Amendment defenses, and they're going to make it really expensive and really difficult to prosecute. So, I think for the U.S. government, it would probably be cheaper to prosecute a company like Enron, you know what I mean, than go after Scientology, just because of all the religious considerations. But I think as Americans, I think we need to, really recognize that a religion that's not checked in its I guess in its practices, if there's no checks and balances for extremist religions, and if you have some of these religions that are just egregiously violating the rights of old people and committing, just unconscionable acts. I mean, really unconscionable acts, and really just treating elderly people just like garbage while they're in the midst of even having, terminal illnesses or dangerous, life-threatening illnesses. I would say that's so serious. I think that's something that is so serious that I think Americans need to become more aware of these things. Okay. And I think we need to, I would say, contact our Congress people and even consider as Americans, is it time that we put maybe an amendment to our, if we were to put, like, say, a constitutional amendment where we even amend even further the First Amendment right to religious freedom, where we can still have a religious freedom, but where we can make clear in the Constitution, maybe through an amendment, that the religious freedom does not go so far as to allow religions to to violate the rights of of citizens. And so I think, how you would craft that, I don't know, because you still want to give religions a lot of leeway to practice their beliefs. Okay. But I think, in my opinion, I think religious freedom only goes so far as the belief systems. Okay. The actual practices of religion, I don't know that they deserve the same protection. Okay. In other words, you can believe what you want, but I don't know that we want to let the First Amendment sort of give like a blank check to the practices of religion, because I think sometimes the practices of religion can sort of that can start to infringe on the rights of individuals. Okay, so like, believe what you want, but what you practice, I don't know that deserves so much constitutional protection. I don't know. It's a tough question, because obviously we don't want to have a country where we suppress religious practice or religious belief, but on the other hand, we have to think long and hard as citizens. How are we going to what can we do as citizens to keep religions from using their constitutional protection as a shield for outright criminal behavior? So even if in the end, even if David Miscavige would win, let's say he was prosecuted, let's say he was convicted, let's say, of orchestrating like a Rico, like, say, a Rico conspiracy, basically, or a Rico organization. Let's say he's convicted, but let's say he gets the best lawyers and it goes up to the Supreme Court and they actually overturn the conviction on First Amendment, technical, whatever. I say it's still worth it. Okay, because whenever you have such abusive practices, okay, even if you're ultimately going to lose from the Supreme Court, even if the Supreme Court or some appellate court's going to turn it over, and even if you're going to run into the Constitution, we ought to test these cases against the Constitution to get activity at the Supreme Court level, so you start getting a record in the appellate history, so that the more appellate activity you can get, the more cases that go up on appeal that hit the Supreme Court, it's going to start ringing and ringing and ringing the bell more and more. And I think eventually, as a public, we're going to have to think, like, how can we put like a nuance in the First Amendment so that you can preserve religious freedom? Sorry. So how can we put like a nuance in the Constitution so that we can still preserve religious freedom, okay? And we can still preserve the right for religions to have their practices, but with some limitation, when that infringes on the rights of other people. I think that needs to be better defined. And I think maybe even the criminal code needs to be maybe updated to include like religious crimes, And I think as a public, I think we need to, find a way to get over all the debates about, religious freedom so that we can all agree on when a religion goes too far. You know what I mean? Now, I don't have the answers. I mean, that's future thinking. I think for now, I think it would be very hard to prosecute Scientology just because they're going to put up a major defense. They're going to appeal everything, and the Supreme Court may have opinions about, may have opinions about how much their First Amendment rights are involved in these crimes. Okay, now um, I think as it stands, I think I think the real problem is not so much the First Amendment, to be quite honest. I think the real problem is going to be the paper trail. Because if you could really prove that they're just committing outright credit card fraud and outright elderly abuse, and if you can prove that it's systematic and it's part of, like, say, a policy to treat elderly people the way they do, and if you could prove that David Miscavige is actually fully aware of it, fully approves of it, okay, I think that would be enough to get him in jail, and to actually prosecute. And I don't even think the First Amendment would protect him from that. Okay, but I'm just saying that, the way the lawyers muddy the waters and the way the lawyers, create these artificial arguments, sometimes that can actually, the way you frame the argument, they may actually be able to win an appeal. So, but the bottom line is, I still think it's worth it to try to prosecute. And I don't know. I just think that maybe part of what would help a prosecution and would help the government have more confidence in prosecuting would be if the public became more unified. Okay, that it's okay to have a religious belief, it's okay to have religious practices. Okay, but all those rights end when you start infringing on the rights of others or committing unconscionable acts. So, I don't know, I don't have the answers, but the purpose of this video is not to give an answer. Okay, I'm not giving an answer, but I just encourage people to be more unified, okay, and more aware of these, excessive religious practices. And I think, especially in the case of Scientology, I think, this is a place where it's more than just. I'm sorry, I've got dogs going crazy. Anyway, I just encourage people to be more aware of what Scientology is doing. Okay, and just, if we can just start with more awareness, okay, that's the first step. Awareness. So I don't have any answers, but I encourage people to become more aware of what Scientology is doing. Okay, and just start with that awareness and just be public about it as people, as a public, because I think the more there's a public outrage, the more I think the government will have more confidence to maybe try to prosecute, some of the most extreme behavior. So sorry about those dogs. Anyway, thanks for watching.